And for more on that missing submarine, we are joined now by Stefan Williams, Professor of Marine Robotics at the University of Sydney. Well, thanks for joining us, Prof. Firstly, help us understand, what is the latest technology in robotics that rescuers are using right now while searching for the missing sub?
So they would use a combination of devices. So they would have Coast Guard vessels, for example, who have come to the site to use acoustic systems to try and listen for any beacons. They'll have aircraft surveying to see if they can find the submersible if it has come up to the surface. And then they may be starting to deploy remotely operated vehicles, which will be able to descend down to the wreck site to help assist with the search.
Nevertheless, I mean, with all that technology there, it's still been very hard to find this vessel, I guess, with the ocean being so vast and the area remote. What about the other factors that's making this search operation especially challenging?
I mean, a big factor here, of course, is the depth. So the Titanic's located in approximately 3,800 meters of water. So that's 3.8 kilometers under the sea surface. So they will have been preparing to descend the submersible to that depth to do some investigation around and examine the wreck site. My understanding is that they've lost contact with the submersible after it's about an hour and 45 into what was meant to be a 2-hour descent. So it will be somewhere near, it will have been somewhere near the sea floor at that point. Acoustic communications are challenging at that kind of range, and of course, optical, like light, just will not penetrate in those sorts of depths. So being able to see where the vessel might be is a real challenge. What they would hope to do is to maintain acoustic communications and tracking while the submersible was underway, but it appears that they've lost that contact with it.
And Professor, just before coming on, I was just looking at footage of this submersible. It's basically like being cramped inside a capsule, not for claustrophobics, but for the people inside the submersible right now who are fighting for their lives. What is the condition like, and what is it going to take to survive, the remaining few hours left?
Well, that depends very much on what's happened in the interim. So I think the best case scenario is that they've lost communications, but that otherwise the submersible's intact and it's potentially coming to the surface. There will be safety devices on board to either drop weight or inflate a bag to increase the buoyancy to bring the vessel back up to the surface. If that's the case, then it'll be a matter of trying to find it using either aerial surveillance or ships on the surface. Another possibility is that they've had some sort of failure of some of the onboard systems and they've ended up potentially descending down to the sea floor. In that case, they would be relying on acoustic beacons and other devices that are independent of the vehicle's main power to try and locate the submersible and to hopefully execute a recovery.
And you've just painted for us.
The most catastrophic potential is for a failure. Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead.
You've just painted for us the best case scenario just a little bit earlier, but how optimistic are you of that actually happening?
I mean, given the amount of time that it's been since they've heard from it and the fact that it appears that they don't have any communication with the submarine, I'd be a little bit pessimistic. I think there's a chance that there has potentially been a catastrophic failure of the pressure vessel, which is where the life support systems and where people would have been housed. The submersible would have been subject to, order 350 times atmospheric pressure. So there's a huge amount of pressure pushing down on these pressure vessels once they're in the deep sea. And if there's been some sort of fault, then it is possible that the vessel would have been essentially destroyed. And that would have had serious consequences for people on board.
And Professor Stefan, when it comes to deep sea exploration or deep sea tourism, in terms of regulation, I'm just wondering how rigorous is it? And because of this latest incident, what is its impact on the future of deep sea exploration?
So I think there are some regulations around operations in the high seas. So outside of particular maritime jurisdictions, there are, regulations of how you operate vessels and the sorts of things you can put in and recover from the sea. I'd say this deep sea tourism industry is relatively unregulated. It's a relatively young industry. It's something that's just coming onto the scene. You can look back a decade and people starting to talk about this as a possibility, but it's only becoming sort of a commercial reality over the last few years. It'll be interesting to see what impact this has. And I suspect a little bit the outcome of what happens over the next couple of days will really dictate the conversation we have going forward about how we manage these sorts of operations and the possibility of using this as a tourism venture and bringing people into these extreme environments. So we talk a lot about deep sea tourism and space tourism, and people are increasingly wanting to kind of experience firsthand these extreme environments. But there are significant risks associated with that.
Well, many thanks for explaining this all to us, Stefan Williams from the University of Sydney.